The room smelled of old kerosene, clean cloth, and damp wood. Outside, wind swept along the main street as if it meant to erase the day's footprints. Lamplight trembled on the wall. From the saloon down the block came softened sounds, low laughter, a tired tune, the faint clink of glass-like noise carried from another life. Marshal Elias Crowe lay in bed, not for rest, but because the body had begun making decisions without asking him. The cough came in slow waves. When it passed, it left a rust taste in his mouth and a fatigue that seemed to settle in the bones. For weeks the town doctor, a decent man with few tools, had spoken carefully, as if the right words could lessen the weight. "Your chest is worn out, Marshal. This air does not forgive." Elias had not answered with anger. Anger required breath. He simply looked at the ceiling and listened to the town creak and settle in the dark, like an old animal finding its place. Beside the bed, on a chair, lay what weighed heavier than the illness. A plain notebook, its cover stained with dust and fingers. It was not a law book. It was not a Bible. It was the record of his final case, the last time he tried to set a measure of order in a land that often seemed to prefer improvisation. Elias had never been a man of much writing. He trusted the straight word, the handshake, the look that could settle matters without a sentence. But this case had pressed him into notes. Perhaps he feared forgetting. Perhaps he feared remembering wrong. And perhaps, most of all, he sensed he would not have time to mend the memory later. Death, he had learned, did not arrive only as an ending. It arrived as a judge. It set every choice under a hard light and asked, without mercy, "Is this what you meant to make of yourself?" Elias closed his eyes and let the past come back the way it always did, slow, like a tired horse climbing a grade. 1. The kind of trouble that starts quiet, it began with something small. Frontier tragedies often did. Not with gunfire, but with absence. A girl did not come home. Her father, Walter Pruitt, stepped into the marshal's office at dusk, hat crushed between both hands. He was not a man who begged. He farmed a stubborn patch of ground outside town, more used to arguing with drought than with officials. Yet his eyes held a plea that did not pretend to pride. "She went to fetch water at the creek," he said, voice failing like old timber. "She shouldn't have taken so long." Elias knew the girl. Clara Pruitt, 11 years old, serious-faced, always watching her younger siblings while her mother cooked or scrubbed. A child already trained to carry the weight of survival. She might have chased frogs, or Walter began, but could not finish. Out there, possibilities were always larger than a man wanted to admit. Elias rose, slow and steady, took his coat and hat. The town was a narrow strip of wood and dust, a place that existed because a rail line passed not far off, and because people needed a point on the map to call home before moving again. "We'll look for her," Elias said. He did not offer more. Promises without certainty were cruelty. He called in his deputy, Tom Kellen, a young man, not long out of boyhood, old enough already to have buried friends. Tom's face carried the frontier mixture of ideal and bitterness, the kind the West gave to men too early. They went with lanterns. Elias, Tom, Walter, and 2 neighbors. The moon was thin. The world seemed made of shadow. At the creek, they found the bucket overturned and marks in the mud. There was no clear sign of a struggle, only the kind of disorder that could mean anything. Still, Elias felt his stomach tighten. Silence there had weight. "Could have been a drifter," one neighbor whispered, as if the word itself could summon danger. Elias disliked drifters, but not out of contempt. He disliked even more the way a town needed easy culprits to keep believing evil always came from outside. He knelt, touched the mud, studied the prints. There were boot marks, adult, and farther on, horseshoe tracks. Not a poor man's horse. A well-kept animal, shoes properly set. Someone with means. Tom pointed to a strip of cloth snagged on a low branch, a simple blue ribbon, likely from a child's dress. Walter made a sound Elias never forgot. It was not a sob. It was the noise of a man trying not to come apart. Elias took the ribbon and held it carefully. "We follow," he said, and they followed. The trail did not lead into a hobo camp in the brush. It did not lead to some nameless corner where the town could set its fear and be done. It led in the direction Elias least wanted, north, toward land with long fences and controlled water toward the Barrow Creek Cattle Company. 2. Power with clean boots. The Barrow Creek outfit had been spoken of before. They bought land. They gathered grazing rights. They controlled water where water meant life. Sometimes they paid fair. Sometimes they pressed. Always they had the advantage of lawyers in a larger town, friends in offices, and the cold patience of those who could wait. Elias rode there at dawn, not alone. He brought Tom, and he brought Walter, because a father had the right to stand where his child's life might be recovered. At the main gate, a foreman waited as if he already knew. Harlan Voss, broad-shouldered, calm-faced, with a courtesy that had never learned humility. "Marshal Crowe," Voss said, tipping his hat with no true respect. "What brings you out so early?" Elias answered with the most dangerous sentence a man could say to power. "A child is missing." Voss blinked slow, as though measuring a coin. "I'm sorry to hear it, but it isn't our matter. I have tracks leading here." Voss smiled thin as wire. "Tracks lead many places. We've got hands, suppliers, travelers coming and going. You know that." Walter stepped forward. Tom caught his arm. Elias felt the tension in the air like a storm building. "I want to speak to your men," Elias said. "I want to see who came in and out yesterday." Voss tilted his head, patient. "You have a warrant? You have the judge's authorization?" There it was, the civilized trick. Not an outright refusal, but a maze. Elias felt the cough rise and forced it down. He would not give Voss the pleasure of seeing weakness. "I have a duty," Elias said. "Duty isn't paper," Voss replied. Elias understood what he truly faced. Not only the disappearance of a girl, but a world where a child could vanish between fences and documents, and men with water and cattle could request paper while a family broke. If Elias forced the gate, he would lose what authority he had. He would be painted as a reckless man, a troublemaker, and the case would die in talk and technicalities, buried under the same dust that covered the street. So he made the first hard choice of his last case. He would not become a hero of spectacle. He would become a man of persistence. "Then I will return with paper," he said, and turned his horse. On the ride back, Walter stared at him as if Elias had betrayed the badge. "You're letting them buy time," Walter said, voice cracking. It struck Elias harder than the cough. "I'm not letting anyone buy anything," Elias answered. "I'm trying to keep them from killing this case before we find your daughter." Walter said nothing. His silence accused more than shouting. 3. The law and the price of using it. In town, Elias went to the justice of the peace, a decent man surrounded by fear and debts. The judge listened, rubbed his chin, and spoke with the caution of one who knew a signature could become an enemy. "Marshal, that company has lawyers, influence. If I sign a warrant without firm proof, they'll make me pay. They'll make the town pay. And if you don't," Elias said, "a child pays." The judge looked out the window. Men crossed the street, busy with their own errands, as if life were only trade and routine. It was always so. One family's disaster rarely interrupted another man's hurry. "Bring me something I can call evidence," the judge said. "Something more than tracks in mud." Elias left carrying the town on his shoulders, not from vanity, but because he knew that if he failed, no one else would try. That night he opened his notebook and began to write. Not poetry, not speeches, just facts, hours, names, distances. A record that might outlive him. Tom, restless, suggested the path many men chose when law moved slow. Pressure, threats, fear. They only understand force, Tom said, voice low. Elias studied him. The West's danger was not only that men could be cruel, it was that pain made cruelty feel justified. If I become what they expect, Elias said, I lose. If I become a man without law, I give them the right to call me one. Tom fell quiet, but his eyes still asked the same question. And what if the law is not enough? Elias had no clean answer. He never had. 4. The witness no one counts. The next day, a lead came from the mouth of someone the town rarely heard. Isabel Rojas, a Mexican woman who washed linens for the hotel and cooked for men who did not bother to learn her surname. She found Elias at dusk, hands red from soap and labor. I saw a horse, she said, a good horse. It stopped near the creek. A man got down. He spoke with the girl. Elias felt his chest tighten. Who was it? Isabel hesitated, eyes flicking toward the door as if the walls listened. A company boy. They call him Owen. Owen Voss. The name landed heavy. The foreman's son. Young. Known in town for spending money at the saloon and treating poor folks like scenery. Elias thanked Isabel. Before she left, he asked, Why are you telling me? She gave a sad smile. Because I was a girl once. And because no one listens to women like me. But God listens. Elias did not know whether God listened, but he listened. That would have to do. With the name, he returned to the judge. Isabel Rojas says Owen Voss spoke with the girl, Elias said. Is that enough? The judge rubbed his chin, looked down, and seemed to age in one breath. A Mexican witness. He murmured more to himself than Elias. They'll attack her credibility. Then attack their cowardice, Elias replied, harder than he meant. The judge sighed, took his pen. The sound of the warrant being signed seemed too loud. 5. Entering the machine. Elias gathered a small party. Not many too large a group would be provocation. He took Tom Walter and Mr. McBride, the general store owner, because a respectable man's presence carried weight it never should have. They reached Barrow Creek near midday. Voss met them with the same practiced politeness, but now tension lived in the corners of his eyes. I have a warrant, Elias said, holding out the paper. Voss read it. The smile vanished as if it had never been. This is a mistake, Voss said. This is the law, Elias answered. They were allowed in. Barrow Creek was a small world behind fence. Worker cabins, barns, sheds, a main office where money turned into decisions. Men paused to watch. Some were only hired hands. Others wore the face of men who enjoyed obeying the powerful. Elias asked for Owen Voss. They made him wait. When Owen finally came, he looked younger than Elias expected, 22, perhaps handsome in the easy way youth can be, with eyes that shifted between arrogance and fear. I didn't do anything, Owen said before Elias asked. A confession did not always begin with those words, Elias knew, but guilt often did. Elias held up the blue ribbon. Did you see this girl yesterday? Owen swallowed and looked away. I saw her. She was by the creek. I only asked if she'd seen a lost calf. Walter's face tightened with something like pain turning into fury. Lear? He breathed. Elias raised a hand to keep Walter back. Where is she, Owen? Owen glanced at his father as if seeking instruction. Elias saw another frontier truth. Fathers and sons, loyalties twisted into chains, love turned into a kind of prison. Owen did not answer. Elias felt the cough rising and bit the inside of his cheek to hold it down. Weakness would not help. I have a witness, Elias said. I have this warrant. If you're hiding something, you're making it worse. Owen gave a short laugh, sharp with nerves. Worse for who, Marshal? For you? For me? Or for these people who think they can ride in here and give orders? Elias kept his face steady. For a girl, he said quietly. Who is not to blame for your pride? The words struck Owen in a way Elias had not expected. The young man blinked, and for a moment his eyes looked human. Harlan Voss stepped in, voice controlled. My son is impulsive, but he is no criminal. Don't smear his name to satisfy these. He looked at Walter with calculated contempt. In that place, Elias realized a name mattered more than a life. He felt an old weariness, not from illness, but from years trying to balance a scale that always leaned toward the powerful. Elias took Owen by the arm firm, not cruel. We're going to talk, Elias said. Just you and me. Harlan moved to block him. He goes nowhere without an attorney. Elias held the warrant up again. Then you can stand and watch your son ruin whatever soul he has left, Elias said. Or you can let me do my job. Harlan hesitated. Men like him did not fear morality. They feared loss of control. 6. The confession and the cost. In a small office away from the hand's eyes, Elias shut the door. Owen breathed fast. He seemed caught between the mask of bravado and the plain truth of consequence. Elias laid the ribbon on the desk. I didn't come here to win a showdown, Elias said. I came to return a child to her father. Owen clenched his fists. I didn't mean, he began and stopped. Elias waited. He had learned confession needed room. Owen swallowed, and the words came out like stones. I spoke to her. She answered me without fear, like I was just another man, and it angered me. He tried to laugh, but it nearly broke into a sob, and he hated himself for it. I wanted to scare her. Just that. I wanted her to learn respect. Elias closed his eyes briefly. How many wrongs were born from that word? Respect when it meant obedience, not dignity. And then? Elias asked. Owen's voice thinned. She ran. She tripped, hit her head on a stone by the bank. She went quiet. He said quiet the way a man tries not to look at what he has done. I panicked. I thought she was dead. I carried her to an old shed by the north fence. I was going to get help when my father found me. Cold moved inside Elias. Your father knows, Elias said. Owen nodded, eyes wet. He said there couldn't be a scandal. Said the company would lose contracts. Said you would use it against us. He said it was better no one knew. Elias stood very still. The air felt heavy. Here was the moral center of the case. Not only a young man's cruel impulse, but the deliberate choice to hide a child like an accounting error truth sacrificed to reputation. Elias opened the door and called Tom, Walter, and McBride. Harlan approached, face set like stone. My son is confused, Harlan said quickly before Elias spoke. He's sick with nerves. He's imagining things. Elias looked at him. Then you will not object to our verifying it, Elias said. We're going to the shed. They went. The shed sat apart, nearly forgotten, used for broken tools and old tack. The walk there felt too long. Walter moved like a man, trapped between hope and the fear of hope. When they opened the door, they found Clara, alive, weak, frightened, dust in her hair, eyes distant with the look of someone who had watched the world turn hostile. She could not stand on her own, but she breathed. Life there still insisted. Walter dropped to his knees beside her and held her as if she were made of glass. There was no grand scene, only the sound of a man weeping without words because he had none. Elias felt his throat tighten. The cough came. He turned away so his weakness would not spoil the moment. Tom looked at Elias. In the deputy's eyes, Elias saw something new, not hunger for violence, but an understanding of human cost. Harlan, however, did not soften into feeling. His face became calculation desperate enough to be almost honest. Marshal, he said low, we can settle this. Money, land, I'll pay. I'll make Walter Pruitt rich. No one has to talk. Walter lifted his head, Clara in his arms. Grief hardened into a fierce, quiet rage. Elias felt the familiar conflict. Money was temptation, because money was survival. To accept it was not simple weakness. It was a man trying to keep his family alive. The West corrupted because it offered shortcuts when the road was nearly impossible. Elias looked at Walter. He did not order. He did not shame. He only said, "If you take it, I won't judge you. But you should know if they buy silence once, they will do it again. With another child on another road, they will learn they can." Walter stayed still. Clara trembled. His decision came out plain, like an old thing. "I don't want riches," Walter said. "I want her to grow up in a place where men like you cannot buy silence." Harlan's breath tightened. For a moment, his mask cracked not into remorse, but into resentment. Elias arrested Harlan and Owen, without spectacle, without cruelty. He used the fragile authority he had, supported by witnesses and by the weight of what had been found. 7. A trial without clean hands. On the ride back to town, Elias knew the case would not end with handcuffs. Arrest was only the first step. There would be lawyers, letters, efforts to ruin reputations. They would call Walter an opportunist. They would call Isabel a liar. They would call Elias a sick man with a grudge. But Elias had what he had never had so clearly: the notebook, the witness list, the chain of facts. And for once, a small town that seemed willing to look at truth even when it hurt. Days later, the company moved its pieces. An attorney arrived by rail, a perfumed man who spoke as though the world were made of contracts. Elias was called into an improvised hearing and listened to the argument the West repeated forever. Power is respectable when it wears clean clothes. The attorney questioned Isabel's character, suggested Clara had exaggerated, painted Owen as a good boy without malice, claimed Harlan was only protecting his son's reputation. Elias sat through it, body weak, mind sharp. When his turn came, he did not deliver thunder. He spoke like a man reading a ledger of human events. "I am not here to ask for spectacle," Elias told the judge, and the men gathered. "I am here to keep silence from becoming habit." A child was hidden as though she were an accounting error. A family nearly broken so that wealthy men could protect a name. If that is permitted, then what are we calling a town? What are we calling a law? There was murmuring. Not agreement from all, never that, but something shifted. Even the skeptical looked uneasy. The judge ruled to hold the men and forward the case to a higher court. It was imperfect justice, partial and slow. But in the West, something was sometimes all a person could wrestle from the machine. The town reacted in its usual divided way. Some praised Elias. Some called him a troublemaker. The saloon split in opinion. The church spoke of forgiveness, without saying that forgiveness without responsibility becomes invitation. Elias went home that night with an unfamiliar feeling. Not victory, but moral exhaustion. Then the sickness deepened. His chest, already warm, could not carry him through the following winter. The cough grew frequent, breath shortened. He worked by stubbornness until the body made its own law. 8. The dying man and the honest reckoning now. He lay in his room. The notebook sat on the chair. The final case burned in him like a low flame. He knew Clara survived, but survival was not forgetting. He knew Walter now carried a memory alongside his daughter, a memory of what powerful men tried to do. He knew Isabel, for speaking, had become a target for whispers and hard looks. He knew Tom had lost whatever innocence he had left and gained a question that would not release him. He also knew Harlan Voss would still have friends. Power did not die in a cell. It only changed shape. Elias turned on his side, opened the notebook, and read his own hand. He saw the plainness of the entries and felt, with a sorrowful clarity, that his last duty was not arrest. It was witness. There had been a time Elias believed the badge changed a man. With years, he learned the opposite. The man changed the badge, and the world tried to change him back. The frontier was not merely a line on a map. It was a human condition, places where need spoke louder than virtue, where fear dressed itself as prudence, where survival could be used to excuse almost anything. He thought of his youth when he accepted the job, not from ambition, because he did not know how to be anything else. He had watched men cheated, women bury children lost to fever, miners die in collapses, families break under the slow pressure of hard seasons. He believed that if one person held steady, life around him might gather into something like order. Now at the end, he saw the cost of holding steady. Sleepless nights, unseen enemies, the loneliness of being hated by both sides at once. A just man was rarely loved in a land of interests. He thought of Clara's face when they found her. Not the face of fear, the face of a child who had learned something terrible about the world and would have to learn, slowly, whether the world could be trusted again. "I should have done more," he whispered, not to God, but to the room. The door creaked. Tom Callan entered, hat in hand. The young man looked older than months could explain. "I brought water," Tom said, setting a cup down. Elias watched him. "Do you still believe they only understand force?" Elias asked. Tom hesitated. "I believe force without law becomes another gang," Tom said at last. "But I also believe law without courage becomes paper." Elias nodded. It was an honest answer, and honesty was rare. "And Clara?" Elias asked. Tom's mouth softened into something like a sad smile. "She doesn't speak much of it, but she went back to the creek with her father, slow." He paused. "She is learning again." Relief came into Elias with pain. Learning again meant scars. Tom glanced at the notebook. "You wrote everything down," he said. "The judge said it helped. That without it, maybe silence would have won," Elias finished. Tom drew in breath, as if he had been holding it for days. "I didn't know being a lawman was this," Tom said. "I thought it was. Catching bad men. Bad men are easy to name when they wear their evil on the outside," Elias said. "The hard part is when they wear respectability, when they speak softly, when they offer money and call it a solution." Elias coughed, and Tom stepped closer, alarmed. Elias lifted a hand to calm him. "Listen, Tom," Elias said, effort plain. "When I'm gone, they will need someone who does not become charmed by his own authority. Promise me that if a wealthy man offers you an arrangement, you will remember the creek. Remember the blue ribbon." Tom swallowed hard. "I promise," he said. Elias closed his eyes. For a moment, he felt he had left something behind besides dust. A thread of instruction, a line that might carry forward. 9. The quiet ending. In the early hours, the wind rose. The town went still. The saloon lamps went dark. The world seemed to hold its breath. Elias woke with the sense of being called by something old, not a voice, but a memory. In his mind, he saw the dirt road, the creek, the forgotten shed, the father holding his child. He saw Isabel, hands red from labor, offering courage without being called a hero. He saw Owen, young enough to ruin his life with a single reckless moment, and older men choosing to turn that moment into a hidden crime. He saw Harlan Voss choosing reputation over truth. Then Elias saw himself years earlier, taking the badge. He saw the man he had been full of certainty, and the man he became full of questions. He understood, with a quiet clarity, that the frontier was not conquered. It was crossed. Each generation crossed it again, repeating old errors, sometimes correcting them, sometimes failing from fatigue. Law, he realized, had never been a finished thing. It was a daily decision, fragile, human to refuse fear and interest as the only authorities. When morning came, Elias asked for the window to be opened. Cold air entered, carrying dust and distant pine. He breathed with difficulty, but he breathed. Light touched the notebook on the chair. "I did not solve the West," he thought, and nearly smiled at the absurdity. No one solved a land built of hunger, hope, quiet threats, and broken dreams. But perhaps, only perhaps, he had prevented one injustice from becoming custom in that one town. Perhaps he had shown that truth did not have to belong to the wealthy. Perhaps he had left town a lesson. Courage was not noise. Sometimes it was record, insistence, witness. The end did not come like a scene. It came like a lamp dimming for lack of oil. And yet, before everything drifted away, he thought of the girl who returned to the creek, of the father who refused the money, of the woman who spoke when no one wanted to listen. He thought of the cost. The Old West, beneath its legend, was built on the human cost of trying to live where rules were still being written by trembling hands, where justice often did not have a good horse or clean boots, only ordinary people deciding, with fear in their chest, whether silence was worth more than a life. Elias Crowe did not die believing the world was fair. He died believing something smaller and truer, that one correct choice, even a modest one, can keep darkness from becoming normal. The next day, the wind swept the main street again, carrying dust and seed, and with them, stories. Some would be forgotten. Others would be told quietly, as warning and as prayer. Because in the end, that was what remained of the West. Not glory, not fame, but the memory of what it cost to remain human when the world around you seemed to prefer otherwise.